Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Claire Sexton, Director of the Artist Center of Waco. We're excited to present the second in a new series of free and open to the public lectures by local artists. It just so happens that Ty is the second local artist who has recently moved to Waco. So our first talk was by Winter Rusalowski, who's a professor at Baylor, who just had a baby last week, her sixth. She's amazing, and she makes so much work. It's unbelievable. But if you're not familiar with the Art Center, we do exhibitions, education, and have a small collection. For 40 plus years, we had exhibitions at the historic Cameron former summer home on the MCC campus, and we had to leave last year around this time. So we've been renting office space at Cultivate 712, which has been super great. They're a gallery and shop and co-working space. And we, in the spring, we purchased a building at 701 South 8th Street, which will be the future home of the Art Center. Right now it's 4 excellent walls and 1 great roof. And so we're looking forward to seeing more of it. We've got some great ideas. We're looking forward to having you all there someday. And that if you have any questions about membership or any of our programs, I'm here. There's a few brochures in the back. There's also snacks and drinks. Don't take the snacks and drinks outside of the room. You'll get in trouble. Bathrooms are just around the corner this way. And so Ty Nathan Clark has been in Waco a little over a year now. He was in Austin for 5 years before that. And before that, he was all over the place. He was not in a bad way. Lots of excellent places. Denton, Dallas, the Colony area for some time, went to school and did a lot of work in Los Angeles, has even spent some time in China, and I think probably 1 or 2 others that I may have missed. But we're excited to have him here in Waco now, where he works out of a studio on the property on his home. And I met him, I knew of him a little bit before that, but I met him because he co-curated the Writing on the Wall exhibit that was at Cultivate 712. That was included a Banksy piece, but also had a lot of other work, including a few pieces by Ty himself. And without further ado, Ty Clark.
All right. Well, we've got 44 years to get through, and when we are done, we'll do question and answer time afterwards. And if the room is silent, I'm going to force you to ask questions. So with any story, there's a genesis moment. So there's a beginning, there's a start. So 1974, that's me, right? There's a little one. So every story has a beginning point. I'm one of three boys, my brothers. It's my mom and dad up there in the left corner, and they're in the back left corner right now, tonight. And I always had a fascination with cool things, even since I was young. You'll see this image replicated later on. This actually showed at the Writing on the Wall exhibit, a painting I did based on that piece. But I started doodling and drawing when I was really, really young. And my mom actually made a quilt when I was 3 years old of doodles and drawings I made at the dinner table on napkins. And then she entered it in the California State Fair and it actually won first prize. So 3 years old, I kind of had my first art gallery and exposure to the art world. And this quote here, there's going to be a lot of Madeline L'Engle quotes tonight because she's one of my ladies. And this quote says, "The child is aware of unlimited potential, and this magnificence is one of the joys of creativity. Those of us who struggle in our own ways, small or great, trickles or rivers to create, are constantly having to unlearn what the world would teach us." And I use this quote because I'm about to go through my whole life. And so there's a lot of things that as you constantly grow older, you are unlearning things that the world teaches you and trying to figure out your place in that. And about that time, maybe 5, 6 years old, is really my first memory of my Uncle Jiggs. So my mom's oldest brother, who was a world-renowned sculptor and raku artist, and he's going to play a really important role in my life through high school, college, and even now. And I was actually introduced to the arts from my grandfather, my mom's father. He would sit me on his lap at his house, and he would teach me about famous artists and read me poetry. And I think a lot of that was because my Uncle Jiggs just had this affluence in the art world and was constantly traveling and bringing things back for him, and so he engaged in that relationship through the arts. And so I would sit on my grandfather's lap, and these are some of his books that I have today, and he would read me the National Gallery of Art books and show me pictures and teach me about these famous artists, and Rembrandt, Michelangelo. He would read me poems from Byron and Rossetti and Keats, and he loved to write as well. And so I had this really young, just beginning and starting to kind of wonder what this whole world of art and writing and creative things was. And here's some of the pieces that I remember him talking about. They had Gauguin prints in the living room, and they had Van Gogh prints, and Michelangelo, and Caravaggio is one of the artists that today is still one of my favorite artists. Just possibly one of the greatest painters of all time, and something that always just stuck in my head from things my grandfather would teach me. And that kind of led up to elementary school. Here's me in the 4th grade. And elementary school, you kind of start playing with art stuff more in school at this point. And usually it's scratch boards and colored pencil drawings. And those are the things I really kind of was drawn to. And I think I love scratch boards because I'm kind of a deconstructionist in my artwork. And I think that scratch board was a way to create something by scraping things away, and then the image kind of appears later. And so it's a real entry into things which were really just animals and kind of real life stuff. High school. For any artist, I truly believe that high school art teachers are the most important people in an artist's journey. And if there are good ones, which they kind of seem to lack that today because public education is starting to take the arts out of schools. And that's one thing that I think is suffering today that was really great when I was in school. Toby Kovich, Kim Brown, and Mario Ferrante are 3 of the biggest influences in my life because they truly saw something in me and fostered it and fed into that. But I was a lot more interested in basketball at the time in high school. And that's where I spent a lot of my time, was playing basketball and then in art class. And I had this really weird, I guess you could say, relationship with people in school because I had jock friends and I had art friends and skater friends. And so I was kind of this guy in the middle that at school tried to balance both. And so that was really more of my focus at that time. And here's a few pictures of high school in Auburn, California, Northern California. It's a really old high school, I think from the early 1900s. This was the art building. This fine art sculptures on both sides of the front doors. And this is a picture of Mario and I a few years back. Still one of my favorite people in the entire world. It just really fed into me and always told me, you're going to be an artist, I just know it. Basketball is great, you're going to be an artist someday. And so this is when you're learning to do lights and darks and shadows and shapes and trying to make things as real as you can. I remember this was a project that said we were supposed to create an advertising campaign through realism, and I created Nasty Cologne. Was my thing. So I always kind of like to play and joke around a lot with my art, which you'll see later. And then of course, you start working with people and collages, and kind of my first introduction into creating abstract pieces and working with watercolors. I think this is the first abstract piece I ever did, maybe my sophomore year of high school. And then I love to draw characters. I love to draw cartoons. And so, obviously you can see the era, late 80s, early 90s, the grunge era with the baggy jeans and skateboarding and punk rock, and that was really the things I drew more than anything. And then my first commission piece, there was a dance troupe in Sacramento, California, and the choreographer was Michael Jackson's old choreographer. And a bunch of my friends were in this dance troupe, and they asked me to make a t-shirt for their dance crew. And so I created this piece, and it ended up selling at Nordstrom. So I think I made $100 for the design, and then they ended up selling it at Nordstrom's in Sacramento after that. So high school ends, and I head to Stockton, California to play basketball. Basketball is still a very, very important part of my life because I want to play pro basketball someday and I want to make it big. But there was a lot of change during those years because I was also dealing with recovering from some childhood trauma, and I kept going back to art to kind of release those things. And this is some woodcuts of E.E. Cummings with poetry that I wrote behind. And I was really influenced by Albrecht Dürer at the time, a Dutch relief printer who's famous for his woodcuts. And so, once again, just that deconstruction of carving wood with tools and then rolling ink on it and pressing that onto paper. You never really know what's going to come out until you actually press it to the paper. So here's some more woodcuts that I did in junior college. And then I started combining poetry, because I love to write, with my characters and my drawings as a way to just kind of release some of that angst and those things that were built up, recovering from trauma, and using poetry to really do that. So now we're at about 1995, and I took a trip with my father to Rwanda post-genocide. And we went in to work with Rwandan orphans after the genocide, and this was really my first experience with what the world really looks like outside of my bubble, as just an American kid who just plays and has fun every day. So I was confronted with child soldiers and things that I had no idea what was going on in this world until I got over there. And this quote, I think, really for an artist speaks to our truest response to the irrationality of the world is to paint or sing or write, for only in such response can we find truth. And I think I was starting to realize that I had something in me that was going to allow me to share these truths of the world and the things that I'm experiencing in ways that are just talking about them, or ways that are just sharing with a room full of people. And so I started creating out of that. And I went back to ceramics because of my uncle, and I started creating these really weird sculptures and characters, and I think they were really kind of a representation of humanity underneath the skin, like kind of our spiritual creature inside. And I was really going through a lot of struggle in creating these things, but I was starting to realize I could express these things I'm feeling through abstract forms. A couple more images during that time. So junior college ends, and I get a full ride scholarship to Azusa Pacific University. This slide. There we go. 1996, 1999, again for basketball. So basketball is still a huge part of the story, but now something new happens. I end up studying under William Catling, who I believe is one of the most important American sculptors in probably the last 20 years. And he saw something in me that my high school teachers saw in me. He saw something that other people had seen in me. And he truly influenced things that I was doing. This is still his work. I just want you to see how incredible his sculptures are. And these pieces are probably in the 6 to 7 feet size and scale. And at this same time, I was introduced to Jean-Michel Basquiat. Basquiat had already become a very famous artist, the first black artist to achieve fame in America, but he wasn't really a well-known person at this time as far as in the classroom in art schools and things. On the East Coast he was, in some places in Europe. But one of my favorite artists, who I'll talk about later, did a film on Basquiat. And this film came out in 1995, and it hit me over the face. And I wanted to be Jean-Michel Basquiat. And every young artist in art school today wants to be Jean-Michel Basquiat at some point in their life. And Matt knows what I'm talking about. And he started out as a graffiti artist, and he would just tag graffiti with a tag name of Samo, which actually stood for same old shit. And he was really tired of all these things being the same, and he wanted to change things through his words and through his art. And so I wanted to be Basquiat. So in our class, I would write on the walls, and I would tag in places where nobody could see it, all over the school campus, and I would use little quotes like, "Art is an oven at 350 degrees in 15 minutes. And while I was in school, I happened to go to school with two really good friends of mine now. Professor James Dashant, who was just here in Waco with us last month for the Banksy exhibition. He goes by Professor Street Art, has written numerous New York Times bestsellers, and is really the most known street art critic in the world, probably, and has written books on Shepard Fairey, Kenny Scharf, numerous famous street artists. And we were in school together with another guy named David Carlson. Jim and Dave both are chairs of art departments in San Diego now and work together. And we would sit around and come up with crazy ideas every day in art school and annoy our teachers and do really crazy installations around campus. And we're the only 3 guys from our entire art program in the art world now, which is pretty normal. It's really hard to get jobs in the art world when you leave school. And so what this led me to through all these things was, who am I? Like, what am I doing? Like, I have this art, I have basketball, life has hit me with a ton of bricks. Like, who am I? And I really, through that, started to study my Uncle Jigs. And I would spend a lot of time on the phone with my Aunt Nancy, Jig's wife, and I would just ask her questions, and she would send me papers and notes and all these things that he would do when he was younger, because I knew it was in my DNA. Art was in my DNA. Here's a few of his sculptures. This is a piece that my parents have here, one of my favorite pieces. These 3 pieces are in private collections around the country. He had work in the Smithsonian, the Tate, museums all over the world, predominantly in Japan as well. A few more of his pieces. This is one of my favorites that he ever did, which was for his best friend that he taught with at UCSB that had passed away. It's called Spirit Boat for Bob. And I just noticed this when I was putting together. You'll see it later on when I get to my work now. These white streaks are representative in a lot of my work. And I just noticed it when I was putting this slideshow together. Some more images just from ceramic national magazines and shows that he did in the States. And so through all this, I really started creating more. I started spending time up late at night, aside from basketball and things, and just creating on my own. And our university bought this huge warehouse just down the road, and it was empty. And so I asked my art professor if I could have a big section of that to make an art studio out of. So I made this huge art studio in this massive warehouse that was only mine. It was mine only. One of my best friends brought all of his music equipment in because he was a guitar player, and he'd sit out there and play guitar, and we hooked up a stereo system and put mattresses in there. We slept out there, we ate out there, and I just painted and created. It was really the first time I kind of got a taste of, oh wow, this could be fun to do for the rest of my life. And so in that, I created work for my senior show. And so these are some images from my senior show. And in college, in art school, your senior show is the biggest thing there is. And it's really your first one-man exhibition of your career. Getting a one-man show is one of the most difficult things to do in the art world. Sometimes it takes 20 years, sometimes it takes 40 years to get that big exhibition. But when you have one in school, you don't really realize how important it is at the time to have that show. And so it's just a body of all the work you've created during your time as a student. I was a big fan of the video artist, Bill Viola. I'd just seen an exhibition of his in LA at the time when I did this piece. And all this were found objects, things I found in dumpsters around LA, put together in pieces. I have no idea why I created some of those, but very Basquiat-ish here, just using doors and found objects and drawing on them and creating things. And so that was my senior show, but then school ends. And what the heck do you do when you want to make art for a living? Who knows? You make art when there's time is kind of the quote that you get from any of your friends that leave art school and get jobs. Are you making art? Oh, I don't really have time. But I continued to find time and create on cardboard because I didn't have any money. I didn't have a way to really do stuff. So I just used pastels and cardboard and was working on figurative things. And really just when I had time, I'd create as I did tons of odd jobs. This piece was probably the biggest piece I did at the time. Which is very kind of graffiti-esque, and I think it is about a 10-foot piece of plywood that I found behind the dumpster. And I would continue to do figurative studies just by using magazines. So I cut pictures out of magazines just to work on facial shadows and working on light and doing figure studies, things that I had done in college just to keep fresh. And so then in 2000, I met my wife. Which is probably one of the greatest parts of this entire journey. She's back there in the room wearing my studio jacket right now. I would say it's probably not very fun to marry an artist. So I made up this quote: behind every artist is a tired wife. Because we have lots of ideas and lots of things we want to do, and we very rarely finish. And that can be completely draining for a spouse, husband or wife. This is one of my favorite pictures of us because it's Mandy studying finance, and it's me studying art. Just kind of showing our opposites, but how well they work together. Another one of my favorite pictures that I think really represents our relationship well. And I love that we have these masks because I'm kind of like googly-eyed, and she's like, seriously? And maybe I'm about to get spanked by the paintbrush as well for all these lofty dreams and ideas. A few years after we're married, we're in the Dallas area, working retail jobs, trying to figure out how to get a leg up in life when you're newly married. That's what most of us experience. And I ended up meeting a few guys in the Denton area, one that worked for me. They were all art students at University of North Texas in the drawing and painting program. And we started discussing all the old art crews from history, from the Lost Generation, from the New York School guys, to Andy Warhol and his factory. And we knew that we needed to do something for ourselves. And so we started discussing ways that we could truly create a cohesive group of work and kind of influence the town we were in, but also influence each other's work. And so we would find old barns in the middle of fields and ask the owner if we could clean out the barn and set up a gallery. So this is in the barn gallery in Denton. So we cleaned out the entire barn, swept it, hung a show of our artwork, and invited the whole city in. And we did a number of these, and it was incredibly influential because as an artist, nobody's helping you. Like, you're always on your own. When you're out of school, you're on your own. The help you're going to get is going to be from other artists. You're going to get a gallery show because of another artist. You're going to do things because of other artists. And it's really a career that's not a career. So you're learning every day how to make money, how to market yourself, how to get out there. And a community of artists is the most important thing every artist needs. They need that community to bind together, to create with each other, to help each other get to that next step. And here are a few pieces that I created out of that time using, I actually think this one's Paul's. But using figurative stuff, scratching lines, kind of doing color theory in a way with blends, kind of Mark Rothko-esque, but still really not sure of who I am in the art world. And so I ended up creating an alter ego, Samo for Prez, which is based on Basquiat that influenced me in college, and his tag name Samo, because in college my favorite quote was Samo for President. And I'd write that around school all the time, and a lot of my classmates called me Samo for Prez. And then it kind of disappeared, but I thought, I need something, so I'm going to create some mystery now behind my work. And so I grabbed a pen name, and it was really my alter ego. And so this is a Warhol print, and then I just kind of put my face in one and created a replica of the Warhol print. And I was doing abstract work at the time, but I felt like I was doing things that all my professors had beat into me for so long in art school, which they do on purpose to break you. And so this group, 5D Artists and I, decided, let's do what we love. Let's start making art that we love. And at the time, Banksy and Shepard Fairey and Black Lorraine street art was starting to get a little bit of a name for itself. And so I started doing stencils at the time. These are both, I think, 6 feet, 7 feet to scale. And I started doing work that had a little bit of my abstract feel behind it, but I was doing street art on canvas because it's something that I love. And I'm a pop culture nut, so I was painting Basquiat photographs from Rwanda. These are two of my favorite pieces that I sold back then. This is the piece that you saw in the beginning of me as a kid. This was just in the street art show at Cultivate last month. This is one of my favorite stencil pieces I did. At this point in time, I was learning to be okay with myself and being present with my artwork. Because something that is very hard for artists is to be present with their work when they show it. It's hard for us to kind of be in the same room with our work and discuss it mingle with people. There's just kind of an awkwardness because you're really kind of bared on a wall. And so a lot of artists I know will go outside and drink wine and have cheese and let everybody else talk about the art. But I realized early on, if I want to sell art, I need to be in the room talking about my art and meeting people and getting to know them, engaging with my work and the audience. And this is one of the first pieces I started doing this with. And this was for a birthday party for the founder of Tom's, Blake Mikowski. We had a big art show in Austin for him. And this is a piece of Helen Keller, and they had just released their eyeglasses at the time. And all of the artists were doing things with eye charts. And so I used the Helen Keller quote that says, "Alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much." And I used this image of her face, but I used one with shadow and one without shadow to kind of represent how she lived in darkness, but yet her life was full of light. And so I've got a video of me making this piece. So one of the things I do is I video every piece that I make. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, it's just a way for me to share my work and my process with people, with other artists out there, and just to find an audience that will start really falling in love with my work and adopting styles and also engaging with me. And the other reason is because I can also go back and watch a video from a piece I did in 2014 and look at how different I am, and maybe I'm using some of the same things, but also it's just a good history log to have video-wise. So this is kind of how these are a few of the other pieces that I would do, these juxtapositions, using old photographs and combining them to create big stencils. This piece I think is like 9 feet in scale, both of Jean-Michel Basquiat. This was a commissioned piece of the Lord's Supper that I did stencil-wise. And it's not the typical Lord's Supper, it's a different one. And about this time, I was working full-time for a Chinese electronics company, because we just moved back from China. And I was just we were tired of it, and my wife and I had this idea that we thought was maybe the ticket for us. We started a fashion company. At the same time that Tom started, we were really the first two social justice fashion companies that started at the same time. So we did a lot of stuff together back then. But I decided, got to figure out a way to make it in this art world. And so I was taking my artwork and putting it on shirts. This is from a fashion show that we did in Dallas. The company was called Veritas, and I was taking my paintings, I was putting them on shirts, and we decided we would go on the road and take my art and take all of our fashion, all of our clothing, and we toured the US for 2 years from coast to coast, all over, with our fashion, multiple cities, trying to really do something on our own. We didn't want to work with people anymore. We just had all these grand ideas of things we could do with artwork and things, and so we hit the road and we did shows in salons. We brought musicians with us. We had an artist collective that was made up of friends of mine and our network from over the years of musicians and writers and sculptors, painters, poets. And so we brought them on the road and we did shows in houses. Sometimes we have 100 people, sometimes we have 5. Slept in random places and lived out of a trailer and a car. And things kind of started to take off. We ended up getting celebrities and bands. Young the Giant, Polisa, the Gossip Girl cast was wearing stuff. It was on Cosmo, E! News. Things were just really starting to feel like this is it, this is our ticket, this is gonna make it for us. And we did crazy things where we found 2 empty buildings in the Louisville area in North Dallas that were 14,000 square feet. We transformed one into a gallery just by asking the owner, hey, could we use your space? You can advertise selling it, we can get a bunch of people here. I don't remember how many people we had at that. It was pretty massive. So we got all my friends in my artist collective, and 14,000 square foot, we set up a gallery. We built sculpture stands, we did all kinds of stuff. There was no electricity in the place, so we had our buddy's grandfather wire it so we could hang can lights to light the place. And in the other venue, we had one of our bands play, and we ended up raising money for our friends to buy 5 acres of land in Kenya for their children's home through that evening. And things were going great, but we were worn out. My wife and I are just worn out, and the fashion industry is so capital intensive, it was breaking us. And at this time I met a guy who was starting an outdoor brand, and we left our Veritas fashion company to help start a company called Kamek out of Austin. And we ended up moving to Austin. And I ended up sinking my teeth into help create this brand, and I had a lot of experience in the marketing world, in the art direction world, in the PR world before that, doing so many things and just educating myself in ways to be successful so that someday I could make art full time. So we ended up outside magazines year to year. We were selling in REI, we were raising millions of dollars of investment, and I was just worn out, and I wasn't creating. And I felt like I was lost in a valley of glaciers starting to disappear. This is from one of our trips to Patagonia with the outdoor brand. But I was still creating in my spare time, late nights, weekends, still messing with doing stencil pieces. But not really sure what I was doing at this point. And I was kind of starting to become a jerk because I was working so many hours building a brand, and I wasn't truly being myself. But I would do shows at South by Southwest. I'd get together with buddies and we'd go to a friend's brewery and say, hey, can we use your extra space and set up a gallery? And so we'd set up galleries. And this whole time I was getting tired of doing stencil work. It just got boring. I was selling pieces, but it just got really boring to me. And so the time had kind of come because I had this mix of all this work I was doing building a brand, and I wasn't able to really create the way I wanted to. But I was working with incredible companies. So these are just a few of the companies that I had worked with over the last 10 years, trying to learn and educate myself in marketing and PR. And so working with companies like Quicksilver and MTV, Outside Magazine, TED, doing TED Talks, I mean, you name it. I had built this wealth of knowledge and this huge, vast network from the corporate world. But it was time to live the dream. It was time to be an artist. And so that was 2014. Left my job, or actually left the company I helped start, left the golden ticket of continuing to increase my stock every year that I was there because it was time to create. And my first week was this. I literally sat in my art studio in front of a blank canvas and had no idea what the heck to do. So I started studying, and I found this quote by Andy Warhol. Don't think about making art, just get it done. Let everyone else decide if it's good or bad, whether they love it or hate it. While they're deciding, make even more art. And so I did it. And the first body of work I started to work on, I titled Tension, because there was a tension that existed between myself and the canvas. And I didn't want to use brushes, so I just used my hands. So I felt like if I'm going to do this, I've got to feel the canvas. I need to feel the paint. Like I need to really become part of this. And so here's the first piece that I did.
If it is growing, if it is clawing, and wants to get out, then let it come out. Your memory's fading, your eyes are like rocks, and I can see you on the floor of your bar, your bar. Oh, you got answers in every warning. Electric circuit, and that's all that.
Here's that piece. And I started at this time really playing with white paint on white, and I started playing with lines and also using some text just to provide just some insight into the piece. And this one says, breathing through dusty lungs to create here. And that kind of just represented how I just felt inside that I couldn't breathe while creating, but I had to do it. And here's a quote from Madeline L'Engle again. It says, in art, either as creators or participators, we are helped to remember some of the glorious things we have forgotten and some of the terrible things we are asked to endure. The artist must be obedient to the command of the work, knowing that this involves many hours of research, throwing out a month's work, going back to the beginning, or sometimes scrapping the whole thing. When the art means even more than the artist knew they meant, then the artist has been listening. And sometimes when we listen, we are led to places we don't expect, into adventures that we don't always understand. That quote holds dear because I started really playing with just these emotions and these things that I maybe had forgotten from my youth, but also things that weighed heavy on my soul that I definitely remembered. And so I started using all these stories and really getting personal with my work. And on top of that, I started to study like crazy. So I knew I had to be disciplined if this is where I was going to go. So I would spend 2 to 3 hours a day studying art, and I would spend another 5 or 6 hours, if not 4 hours a day, painting in the studio. And for my first year, my focus was just to create work, like only to create work. Not show it, not get out and sell it, just create, because I wasn't confident in my work. I hadn't really truly done this yet. And so I needed to build that confidence up behind my work. And every artist chooses what goes out of the studio. So there's a lot of bad work out there. And that's because artists are too willing to just go ahead and get rid of work without truly building into it and truly spending time developing as an artist. So it's our choice what people see. We can show our best work, or we can show our best work with bad work. And I wanted to make sure I was showing my best work. And so I started playing with a lot of different things, a lot of different techniques, studying artists that I love. Me in my studio in Austin, which was my garage. Started playing with ink braiders and palette knives and graphite and oil sticks, things that I hadn't done before. This is from a series called Healing Wounds in that time, where I was studying emotional wounds and physical wounds and the relationship of the two, and also pairing that with social economic wounds as well in struggling communities, and did an entire series of work based on essays that I wrote around those subjects. And I like to have fun in my studio, like I said before. And so one of the things I knew that I needed to keep up was always being joyous in my work, because as an artist you can become very isolated when you're working. So I always wanted to find ways that I could have fun with myself, because I'm with myself all the time. And so I started doing these pictures of me jumping in front of my canvas. 2016, I ended up getting an artist residency in Budapest. I applied to, I think, over 100 residencies around the world, and I got accepted to 3. And I chose one in Budapest. How could you not create in a place like that? This quote, when we were children, we used to think that when we were grown up, we would no longer be vulnerable, but to grow up is to accept vulnerability. And I think while I was in Budapest, I really started to learn that quote well. This is me in my apartment, just reading some other Weissel. I was around a lot of incredible art in Budapest, and I love this quote. Each of these men whose paintings I stand before and admire in great fashion, they're just that, all men, and they're all dead. Their distance from us in chronology seems to give them an overwhelming authority, but they weren't dead when they were painted, and they were as human as the rest of us. And that quote for me, it was like, I kept thinking, how am I going to, I want to aspire to be like these guys. I want to, I want my art to show in museums someday. There's no way I can get there. And then I read that quote when I was in Budapest, and I was like, oh, they're just men, just like me. I've got time. But while I was there, I was in the midst of some personal trauma because one of my good friends, Allison's husband, was in a scooter accident the year before. and ended up with severe brain damage, and was basically a quarter of the man that he used to be. And he's one of the greatest font designers in the world, so you all use probably his fonts on a regular basis. And he taught at Cambridge, was just a brilliant, brilliant man. And while I was in Budapest, his organs started failing. And with that, my space that I was creating in was actually a place that in World War II, the owner of the house, who's our residency director, she, with her family and 2 other families, survived Nazi Germany after the house was bombed in this basement where I actually worked. So I was dealing with just the emotions of being in that space, which was really, really heavy. And there's a steel door that when I walk down the stairs has bullet holes from where German soldiers were trying to get in through the door. And so here's a video from my first day creating in that space. This is the first time I learned to truly use texture as a metaphor in my work. And I started playing with masking tape, and as I was working through trying to build texture in my work, I used masking tape to represent when there's chaos in our lives. By putting the tape over it, it kind of covers up some of that chaos. But then when I removed the tape in a line, it would take away the marks, but there was still evidence that something was there before. And Vernon passed while I was in Budapest, my friend's husband, and I was thinking through the fact that there's been so much chaos with Vernon over the last year, and so that tape's just been holding on. But once he passed and that tape was removed, he may be gone, but he's still going to be representative in their lives, Allison and their children's lives. And so I started to really play with texture as a metaphor. When we got back, I took all my studies, and my wife and I emptied out our entire living room and created a gallery in our house and did an art show of all of my studies on the trip, and I was able to share those stories as well in our house. And then these are some of the larger, this is one of the larger pieces I did based on all of my study in Budapest. And here's a little video of that. So building upon the residency, I continued to just create heavily and using lots of texture in my work and my pieces. And you can still see they're not too cohesive yet. I'm still playing with a lot of different styles and techniques and really taking risks with things I'm uncomfortable with to continue to build work and build into the stories that I want within my work. And I really started to come to grips with texture in this piece. And you'll see as I'm learning, this piece goes from one idea to another idea to another idea, and then finally ends completely different than everything you'll see as it's going. That's the final piece there. So just about that time, I started building a lot of momentum in Austin. I actually got named one of 10 emerging contemporary artists in Austin to know, and had a lot of momentum really going. But thanks, Austin, it's time to leave. Just a few months after that, we packed up and moved here to Waco. So one of the reasons for that is we wanted to buy a house or build a house, and we wanted to build a studio on some property, and you can't do that in Austin anymore. And we had a lot of friends and people in Waco, and my folks decided they would move to Waco as well. And so we moved and built my studio, my dream space really, on our property. Here's a little bit, just a little video on some things in my studio.
I do not want a small gesture,
Narrated
standing
by
at the easel with a
Walter
sable
and
brush, and having looked at cubism, which can be very detailed and minute and fine, and has that essence at times of the easel
Particularly
and the sable
Picasso's
brush.
cubism
I
is
literally
something
wanted
that
to
I just sort of
breathe,
passed
breathe,
around,
put
I
it
suppose
on.
largely owing to the example of Pollock. And both Pollock and Hoffman seem to me to have, I don't want to say solved the problem, but at least they solved the problem in a sense for me. I mean, they came to terms in some kind of really concrete and accomplished way with what had happened with 20th
That
century
made it
modernism.
real.
with
I mean, that
European
wasn't, I wasn't just making a few marks and rubbing them out myself. I may have said that painting relates as much to life as it does to art, or vice versa, but I don't think so. I said that you couldn't make either.
Picture really outside of my studio. I do an open studio tour here in Waco every 2 months. So if you follow me on Instagram, I'm usually putting pieces up, or you can check on my website. But usually every 2 months, I end up doing an open studio tour for the public, just to come in and see new work and talk art with me. I'm going to go to some of my influence recently. So this is all recent, within the last, since we moved to Waco. I spent an enormous amount of time studying. I read frequently. I watch art videos and documentaries, and I not only study life stories, I study the work immensely. Cy Twombly is one of my greatest influences. Somebody I relate to because we create very similar, and I want to create like him. But he's somebody who is really, truly a poet more than a painter, I would say, because he uses his color, he uses his texture and the flow of his pieces to speak like poetry. And a lot of his work is based on poetry or mythology. Currently, probably my favorite artist right now is Antonin Tapez, who's a Spanish painter. Also very influenced heavily by literature and books. His dad is a book historian. So when his father died, he inherited books from 16, 1700s. And he used a lot of them within his work because they were falling apart and becoming just dust. And so he started using them in his work. But his work really speaks to me currently. Anselm Kiefer, German painter, a large-scale painter. The things he does with texture, I don't understand. And I practice daily using cement and dirt and wire and all kinds of things just to try and get the texture that he puts in his pieces, because it's just fabulous. And these pieces are 30 to 80 feet in scale. And they're all on canvas, which blows me away. A number of his pieces actually in Fort Worth at the Fort Worth Modern. Helen Frankenthaler is one of my favorite people on the planet. One of the most gutsy women in the history of painting, who basically, at the time of the New York school exploding, she was kind of on the fringe in New York, but did things that nobody ever done before. Post-Cubist modernism. She started laying down really large-scale canvases, and she was the first artist to pour paint and really start moving paint around with big brushes and big pieces of wood. Her work is fantastic and her story is amazing. And she painted at the same time and hung out with Joan Mitchell, another female abstract painter whom I love and am currently studying right now. And then probably my biggest influence art-wise is Julian Schnabel, who did the movie on Basquiat that I talked about early on. I think he's definitely probably top 5 artists in the world, painters. Out of those 5 guys, he's the only guy that still paints his work. All the other guys have studios of 50 to 100 people that make all their work for them now, which is pretty normal when you get to that size. I love his work. It's definitely a big influence in what I do. But Julian is also a filmmaker, and he's made numerous films and has won Academy Awards for his films as well. And that's a place that I like to do things as well. And so I just finished my first documentary film as a producer this year. And so I love stories in my work. And if I can take that storytelling to the screen as well, that's another place I want to go. And this is a basketball story, and through this film I've been able to spend time with some of my favorite guys in the NBA over the last few years. Steph Curry is our executive producer for the film, and he's a big part of everything that we're doing. And it's been fun for me to go back to basketball, since that was so much of my story when I was younger, and kind of get engaged back in that world and meeting some of my heroes, coaches and ex-NBA players, spending time at places like ESPN. And we're hoping to distribute this next year, so our distributor has distributed 8 of the last 10 Academy Award-winning documentary films. And this quote, another Madeleine L'Engle quote: "When we are writing or painting or composing, we are, during the time of creativity, free from normal restrictions and opened up to a wider world where colors are brighter, sounds are clearer, and people more wondrously complex than we normally realize." Some images of me in a studio currently, working on my last series over the last year and a half, where I really feel like I'm starting to create some of my strongest work to date that I'm really confident in and really pushing hard. These 2 pieces I just shipped to Charlotte last week. And here's a video of me making those pieces.
Go, Patrol, go, Telcom, go, GNC, go, Econ, go, Surgeon, go, Capcom, we're go for landing. Go, Telcom, go, GNC, go, Econ, go, Surgeon, go, Capcom, we're go for landing.
This quote has taught me, I think, one of the biggest lessons as an artist. Inspiration more often comes during the work than before it, because the largest part of the job of an artist is to listen to the work. And so this is just a picture of me sitting and really listening to the work. So a lot of times it's easy to just get in and paint, but I really spent a lot of time trying to figure out how my voice is going to come through my work, when I can't just sit here and talk to you about my work in front of you. I want my work to be able to have that voice and speak in a room. This is second to the last piece that I just finished.
Too complex, much too complex, too complex, much too complex, too complex, too complex, too complex. Too complex.
These are my most recent work that are just studies on paper that I've done in the last, I think I did them last month, using old vintage books that I have within the work. Just studies with acrylic and graphite, and then also stitching on paper. So where am I today? This year I got accepted into the New Texas Talent Show in Dallas at the Craighead Green Gallery, so I was one of 40 artists in this show that has been going on for 30 years now in the state of Texas. I just started school again. I was asked to be a part of an invite-only post-grad program at the Artist Center at Fuller Seminary in LA, and there are 5 of us in the class, and we are being taught by world-renowned painter Makoto Fujimura, who's an abstract Japanese-American artist. He's actually here in Waco this week speaking at a conference at Baylor. And so over the next year, I'll be between California, Princeton, New Jersey, and here in this class. I just got my first official one-man show exhibition that will be in Charlotte at Sozo Gallery right here in the Hearst Tower in February of 2019. So I'm pretty excited about that. It'll be about 25 works, so I'll start working on that next month. And then here in town at Cultivate, this next summer, 2019, I have a one-man exhibition that'll be June and July, 2-month exhibition, and I'll be doing all the works for that show as well. And then one more really fun thing, I am starting, this is Sean Oswald, he's a local artist here in Waco. He's also a professor at the community college. We are starting a live Instagram show. An idea I came up with and invited Sean to be a part of with me, where we are going to field questions from our Instagram followings on art history, the art world, the art career, art in general, and we're literally going to sit and answer those questions live on camera. And Sean is a realist painter. He's a classical painter. I'm, of course, you just went through my lecture, an abstract painter. So we're 2 opposite fields of thought and how we create, but we're 2 like minds because we're both artists. So we both studied the same things, we just happen to create differently. So we have similar but different views. So I think it's going to be a really fun show. So that's coming soon from right here in Waco, and I'm really excited about that. And that is my story.